he has. I always say that film producers are difficult to identify. Some of them are artists, some of them are accountants, and some of them are adventurers or gamblers, and
a few pirates.
A few pirates.
A couple scoundrels.
And at the same time, nobody would be in this room if it weren't for the film producer that made the films, that made us, that inspired us, and that made us become, part of this industry. Because I believe that the first most important thing is the spark, the inspiration that comes from experiencing films, right? So I will start asking questions to Ted about the current state of the industry and what it means today to be a film producer. But very soon I'm going to also open the conversation with you, because there are many professionals in the audience that I'm sure you would like to ask questions. So feel free to raise your hand, and if you have any, if you want to fill in, let us know. So Ted, first of all these different descriptions we made of what is a film producer, what would it take now to be a film producer in the current environment?
Let me take a little ways back,
Yes.
because it's an interesting question. When after we made our first film that won a major festival, that was Ang Lee's The Wedding Banquet. It won Berlin, and sold it ourselves because nobody believed it was a commercial movie. I sat down with the man, Samuel Goldwyn, who bought it from us in the U.S., and he asked us, my business partner and I, James Seamus, who are you guys? Are you guys artists or businessmen? And I said, I think we're both. And he was like, no, you can't be both. And I still think we're both, and I think it's very much a key piece of what one does. I think a lot of my work these days is as a shrink. I think I'm the therapist to about 8, 9 directors right now that need counseling on a weekly basis of multiple hours. They do double sessions. And for whatever reason, don't try to match them up, but a lot of them are ex-addicts or alcoholics along the way. Obsessive people. And a lot of the counseling, both for that and then the folks I mentor too, is often comes down to the helping give somebody the courage of all that it takes to get a movie made these days. That even the folks who've had tremendous success are hitting a wall. Like, it's not getting done. It doesn't work. They know that they're going to be exploited by the business. And the question often is it still worth it? And this is where, as an atheist, I feel like a priest, where I end up speaking a lot about the most important piece is the devotion, is the commitment to work on something beautiful that you have no idea if it actually can get made, if it will get made, what that is. And I'm totally opposed to the Western myth, the Judeo-Christian myth of the artist must suffer, or any of us must suffer. We treat suffering in our culture as heroic. And I think that really gets us trapped, right? Like, whatever happened to simple things like satisfaction. But nonetheless, despite that, like that whole thing of you are going to start something where you don't know the end. You are going to go across, like the heroic adventure of making a movie. If you're a director, you're making 10,000 decisions a day, right? You are going to have to convince hundreds of people to see things the way that you want to see it, where you actually don't know how you're going to see it at the same time, right? You're going to have a shared endeavor. I came across something today that just was like, yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about, where it was speaking about the myth, or the way we all got locked into, the artist must suffer. And everyone uses Van Gogh as the artist that truly suffered for his art. But Van Gogh never would have gotten where he was if he didn't have a brother who loved him. Van Gogh was somebody who was loved. That's why he could do what he did in so much in such a short time, right? And so I find that a lot of what I do with folks these days is that piece of we're going to keep going, and I'm here with you, and I believe in you, and we will get there. And right now, like the old way, it used to be really easy to make a movie, right? All you had to do was knock on over 200 doors, have people throw rocks at you, spit on you, perhaps even worse on you, and you had to look clean and fresh as a daisy and keep going to the next door, hoping that one day somebody was going to open it and tell you, oh my God, I love this story, I'm doing it. I always, when people ask me like what kind of movies I make, I go, oh, it's really easy. I have the idea that nobody wants to write. And then I have the script that nobody wants to direct. And then I have the director and the script that nobody wants to star in. And then I have the director, cast, and script that nobody wants to finance. And then I finish it and it's the one that nobody wants to program. And after a few daring festivals, thank you, Biograph, for screening Invisible Nation, people start to say, why didn't you bring this movie to me earlier? I would have financed it and distributed it along the way. I'm working right now with somebody who America considers one of its greatest writers. And he's depressed because we don't have funding for his film yet. And he was like, Ted, you were the only one that believed in this script. You must be an idiot. No one should believe in this script. We've now done like 50 drafts, and it's beautiful, right? And it's going to get made. And I said, I almost said his name. I said to him, like, settle down. I've now made, I think, 140 films. And that story that nobody wanted to do it but me is pretty much true for about 125 of them. So we'll get there, and we'll get it done, and it will be loved. So maybe it's confidant, consigliere.
Theo Koch's brother.
Exactly. Like you have to, yeah.
Theo Koch, yeah.
You have to be there through it, and generally, like the challenge, because we have many hats we wear as a producer, and I've always been somebody, not always, but by about my 15th film or so, I've started putting the money together for my movies. And I do that too, so people expect you to know how to do it. And right now, like one of the reasons I often refer to this moment as the current crisis is to tell you the truth. I don't know how to put movies together, at least not ones that are ambitiously authored, that really want to put a voice forward, that want to say something about the world that we're living in. The kind of perfect storm of disasters have occurred that make the clear path that much harder to find. And it's very easy to think, I told you, you get me going, and then the job is to interrupt. But to find the path to get it done is much harder. But yet, I would say we're on the verge, the precipice of a fantastic transformation that's going to come in cinema. But sitting next to it is also perhaps a bigger darkness than we've had in 30 or 40 years.
Yeah. You keep mentioning the 200 doors that we had in the past that we could knock at. And nowadays it's 5 or 6, you said?
Yeah.
Something like that. And they're not as welcoming as some of the previous doors. I mean, not all 200 of them were welcoming, but some of them were accepting, somehow. And so how could we make things better? Do we need more doors? Or do we need to crash the house, crash the party, so to speak?
So I practice what's generally called independent film, right? But it's a euphemism. It's not independent. It's always been tremendously dependent. And there's a saying that folks say in business often, at least folks at Amazon, where I used to work, say in business often, that in any closed ecosystem where the dominant power or capital believes that the system is good enough, they will not invest in improvements to the product or the process because everyone thinks it's good enough and the opportunity cost is too great. They can make more money doing something that feels much more needed by customers. And as a result, you'll have a decay of that system where things will go neglected. I feel independent film, particularly American independent, but I would also accuse international cinema too, of the last 40 or 50 years is a history of doing the wrong thing. We've let this decay occur. And when I say what that decay is, it's tons of little things. It's like, not fixing that squeaky door that expands during the hot months and you can't quite open it, right? It's not fixing the pothole by your driveway that your car bumps under. Mm-hmm. It's all these things that start to make everything worse. I read somewhere that in any house, if you listen to the hum of your refrigerator, your radiator, and all these things, it's a cacophony of sounds. And I'm not great in music, so I can't tell you what it is, but they once referred to that exact sound as the devil's symphony. It's the orchestration of sounds that drive you mad. And that's kind of where we are right now in the film business, in the devil's symphony, right? But the fact is, you can come in with a trained ear, a piano tuner, and you can retune. There's actually a guy, this is where I read about this, I read a story about a guy that will come to your house and readjust your radiators and your refrigerators so you actually have harmony instead of dissonance around you. And there's tons of these little things that if we all started to do those things, to figure out a small operational improvement, not only would it work in a bigger way, so you could recognize you actually can change the world, you can do little improvements to make things better on a consistent basis, and things get better, but you would also start to build these things together that become a necessity. And that necessity would be a counterbalance to the global streaming platforms right now that are dominant. And they have a much different business than what all of you in this room are here for. Because I suspect you all entered the film business because you fell in love with something. You fell in love with a movie. You saw how films change people's lives. And you said, hey, I'm going to do that. That's how I want to use my labor in service of making something greater than myself that can move people. But that's not what their business is. Global streaming platforms are an audience aggregation business. It's not about making it one beautiful thing that can make money. That's what, when we had 200 doors, the business was very simple. It was about trying to deliver profit in the service of art, right? That's not what it is for those 4 or 5 global streamers. It's about conformity. It's about making everybody want the same thing. And when I think about the perfect storm, this perfect storm of things like COVID, the rise of the internet, surveillance capitalism, all of us surrendering our privacy to what is ultimately a Skinner box, a behavioral control mechanism, it moves us to all want the same thing, right? Alice in Wonderland, the white hare said, I like what I get. He didn't say, I get what I like, and everyone thinks he said, I get what I like, but he said, I like what I get. And that's what all of those streaming platforms are training people to do, to be satisfied with a subpar product, something that doesn't change your life, something that doesn't put you in service of something greater than yourself, something that just dulls you out and makes you forget that you can't go outside or that there's war and genocide somewhere else. It tries to soothe those things and settle us into a flat mechanism. But that's not what art does. But that's really what art can do and what you know, and why I get excited about this moment, because this moment is really about the convergence of how corporations, how machines now, how politics, not necessarily the politicians, but the nature of politics, all make us surrender to conformity. And yet art is this thing that celebrates individualism, celebrates difference in a way that is, like, that we love, not as we go apart into poles. And I think when you look forward to what happens next in cinema and art, and I only, by the way, had 2 espressos. See what happens if I had 3. I'm plumbing to the close. But if you look at what's going to happen...
You didn't even get cake.
Exactly. If I had sugar...
So it's not a sugar rush.
But what's happening now is, I think, this great moment where, because their business is... And this is also an interesting tidbit. As you'll see, I like to talk in tangents, or parentheses. This is a parentheses. That what was said before I ever went to Amazon, I ran a boutique streamer, and it was a startup, and like 25% of the company had already become millionaires on other startups. And so I was the CEO, and they had no problem coming to me and telling me what my job was, right? I thought I was running a film company, a streaming company. They were like, it's an audience aggregation company. And you understand what that is. You know how to build an audience, right, Ted? Audiences are built by a regular cadence at a consistent quality in an environment that people know, that people trust and want to participate in, right? That's a really important statement, because it's what streaming is and what all subscription services are and what ultimately the internet wants it to be. And it's really about behavioral control. I knew someone would walk out fast, but so it happens. But
It's a festival. It's a festival. She's filling an Amazon order right now.
But that free delivery.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, so audiences are built by a regular cadence at a consistent quality, an environment that people trust and want to participate in. That's what that business is, and it's really about developing a habit, about all of us becoming addicts. That's what that's how they sell heroin too, right?
Of course.
Same way, that's what that business is. And I find, when I look at this moment, and when I have to tell my friend, I know there's not 200 doors, and I know no one else but me liked it, but we're going to get this movie made, partially, I think, because it feels to me a lot like it did in the late 70s, early 80s, when I wanted to make movies. And it feels like this wave happens every, 15 to 20 years, where people say, I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore. I want something that doesn't feel programmed, that feels honest and human. And I think that's what this next wave of cinema really will be about, is people really doubling down, leaning in. I hate these phrases. I got to find another. People committing to making things that emphasize the unique nature of being alive, making mistakes, being a little weird at times, not actually tying it all up at the end, allowing there to be room for ambiguity and rumination and wormholes and all these different things to go into and explore later on, not explaining everything. I'm not going to explain that.
No, it's okay. Do you think that one of the assets of the revolution against the audience aggregators will be movie theaters? The actual brick and mortar.
I think that one of the things that people crave, and I think this has been around for a long time, but particularly in a post-COVID or pre-next pandemic mode, is authentic experiences with other people. And there's many different ways that can come about. But I've always found, cinema, really to be an incredible thing, because it's the only legal way I know that you can have a shared emotional experience with people you don't know in the dark. Everything else, you got to be careful about, right? But that it's a remarkable thing. I got depressed once in my life, in the early 2000s, and Michael Moore, the documentary filmmaker, came into my office at that time, and he was like, "Why are you bummed out, Ted?" And I was like, because politics once really mattered to me, and I feel I'm just not doing enough in the world of politics. And he looked at me kind of dumbfounded and said, "Ted, all of your movies are profoundly political. What is more political than sitting next to somebody you don't know and making them feel something that you feel at the same time, whether that's laughing or crying or what?" Yeah. I like to think I have one particular brand of movie I do really well, which is I make grown men cry. That's what I try to do. If I do that, I feel
nice,
like,
Nice. I have two more questions for you before I open to the audience. Two things that I really admire you for is that you're very outspoken for the subject of regional film festivals, which, as director of Biografilm, I relate. I mean, this is international festival, but also very much grounded in the community of a city, as you probably understood by hanging out with us for the last couple of days. And the other one is something that nobody really speaks of in the industry, and that is the question of mental health. So I would like you to briefly speak about, again, the importance of a community of film lovers gathering together, and also, what can be done better. And I believe what you said about the little improvements of the infrastructure of the industry also go through the concept of a better mental health for the industry workers.
Well, I think they're both really linked. And I think they're linked to a little bit about what we talked about last night, too, which is democracy, right? And we have fallen into a pattern of hierarchies that we use and we surrender to without questioning, without saying that this is not how it has to be, right? I really do believe that all of us, want something better, and we all are willing to work, particularly if we get to work together for that something better. But at the same time, we get tossed this logic that this is just the way it is. It's this way, and we have to be happy with that. Like, don't fight it, use it to your advantage, don't try to move it. And in the film world, we see that reflected in the different types of hierarchy, the power strategies, and whether that's patriarchy, right? And when you wonder why there are 94% of the narrative directors are men, and when you look at documentaries, you actually see gender representation proportionality, equal gender representation proportionality. Why is that? How does that happen? Well, it happens because of the funding mechanisms, right? That in documentaries, you have stage financing. You actually have to deliver a proof to get the rest of the money. You have to be able to do what you say you're going to do, and you get the cash, right? Whereas in fiction, the way it's developed is just the opposite. One gender since birth has been trained to talk arrogantly and confidently about something they know nothing about. And then we give them millions of dollars to go out and do that, right? 10,000 decisions a day. Anyone who tells you they know what they're doing when they go off on set is a liar, and that's who gets the money, right? So you start to see that. And why is that? Because the centuries are about men being in charge, right? So do you want to keep that going, or do you want to actually say you believe in equality, right? Sounds good to me, right? So that exists in many different things, and people use that to keep themselves in charge, right? So that's where, when I start to talk to people who say, like, I don't get it, Ted. I have the skills. I've done the work. It's not happening to me. Am I out of my fucking mind? How do I go on, right? It's because they're not recognizing the history that has come before them that they have to fight through. I'm really happy that through my early companies, I have tons of assistants who are doing, ex-assistants who are now captains of industry, men and women both. Yes. And a lot of that, like when they came into my office, they stared down at the floor, they looked at their shoes, they had stains on their shirt, you know, they sweat more than I do, and I sweat a lot. You know, whatever it was, they felt poorly about themselves, right? And they had to shift that to show them that, no, like, actually, you're super smart, you have great taste, you know, have courage. How do you go forward and do that? You know, so that, but well, to tie these two things up, right? I've always felt the more local, whether that's friends and family, right, or regional festivals, the more local, you get a truer voice that's separated out of those hierarchies of power. And then you start to see how they can find the more folks like them to build an echo, build a coalition, start to ripple outwards. So when I look at the way we select let's just say the 50 directors each year that get awarded into the top festival, the 5 top festivals and top berths each year, you know, it feels to me we need to widen our view and find other mechanisms to do it. And where I think that actually starts to happen is in the local festivals, because they don't feel the same pressures of having to satisfy all of their sponsors, all of the national critics, becoming a sales item along the way. They can invest more in both you know, unique voices and folks who are in touch with cultural relevancy of the moment, right? You know, and that's so necessary to keep art, you know, growing. And like a little sidebar on that, when I went to Amazon, they had a green light process like most other companies, which was based on comps, on competitive analysis, the films that came before. And most of those films were directed by white, straight men, and most of those films starred white, straight men and women, right? And so when you first showed comps and you wanted to make a film by a director from a different background than that, for whatever reason, it wouldn't match up. They would say, or someone that starred, or a storyline. And yet, we had this big problem on the service, that there were a lot of people who weren't like that were already paying subscribers, but they weren't watching movies yet, right? And so it's like, wait, they get the movies for free and they're not watching them? Why is that? Well, it seems pretty simple to me that their perspective wasn't paying attention to. And this is a great thing that global streaming delivered, which it actually put creators and business in touch with who their audiences were. And it was a much broader audience. So as a result, we added a little thing in our greenlight process that just spoke about cultural relevancy. Has this story been told from this perspective yet? And if it hadn't, it meant there was an underserved audience. And if you could target that audience with it, you can have an oversized result. You know, so that's there. Hold on. Yes. So that was festivals.
Hold on, I'm here.
And just to hit the mental health, you know, piece, I think I hit it kind of already.
You did, yes.
You know, Vanessa says yes. So as long as Vanessa nods, I feel good.
Okay, so we have time.
Other than the fact that we're all crazy, and I know that very well, not from you, Vanessa, but for my own self.
So,
She
but
hears me
Vanessa
say
is
that
the
all
only
the
one that is, Vanessa Hope was sitting here, the director of Invisible Nation, that screened yesterday as a special event of the festival. Thank you, Vanessa, for allowing us the Italian premiere of the film. And yes, so we're all crazy. We all drink too much coffee. And
No such thing.
No, there's no such thing as too much coffee. But I wonder if there are questions from the audience. Please raise your hand and introduce yourself.
Vanessa's grandfather was a film producer who wrote a article once for, I believe it was Foreign Affairs magazine, that said 1,000 ambassadors, 120 ambassadors, whatever the number was. 120,000 ambassadors, right? And basically, each film that goes out can speak to so many people and speak about different things. And I think it is that challenge of soft power, right? That movies, no matter what they are, all movies are political, right? You can't say a movie isn't political, and a filmmaker can't say that they're not political in making their movies. You make a Marvel movie, it's very political, right? You make you can just go through that in any which way. And as folks are trying, to figure out the survival of their own people, which each country everywhere should be able to figure that out, they make certain choices along the way and think that perhaps sometimes limiting access to something is better than open access to things. People will find their ability to get what they want no matter what, anywhere, no matter how. But as a result, I think that they start to stack rank their goals, their priorities, and they say that, well, if we want to one day get into China, or we one day don't want to get kicked out of X or Y other countries, we have to adopt this piece of behavior. It doesn't mean it's true, but that's what they feel. And I think you see this repercussion right now in many different ways. Film festivals everywhere used to respond to films that took a bold stance in anything. And you see many festivals starting to shrink that funnel, so to speak, to filter out more controversial stances along the way. They don't have to say they're agreeing to them, but they feel that by giving them the option of being up on the stage somehow, that they're contributing to that point of view. I don't necessarily agree, but others do. And with that, the limits, people start to then self-censor themselves. Like in America, you hear filmmakers very much say that they don't want to put this in their film or that in the film because they're afraid they'll be judged by it. The deep weight of identity politics. Who can tell what story, or who should have the right to tell what story? It's challenging times. I think we all are best served by starting to think through for ourselves what matters most and what we ourselves want to stand for, right? And if we had a green light structure for our own movies, what would we do, right? So like one of them for me would be, I really want to do no harm to others. So like, how do I judge if I'm doing that with my movie, right? I don't want my success to limit other people's opportunity, but I also want an open playing field to be able to go out and do whatever the hell I want to do, and that gets a little challenging along the way. I think we would all be served, much better if we said, I need my movie to help build that non-dependent cinema ecosystem that prioritizes an artist over corporations and other things along the way. I need that to happen with my film. I want my film to somehow be innovative in a way that can help improve the economic situation for other films. I want my learnings that I have from my movie to be able to freely transfer to other people. I want to have a right to the data that my film generates. And I don't believe that, just like you can't sell yourself into indentured servitude, I don't think anyone should be able to sacrifice the sharing in the success of their movies. But actually, the system right now denies most artists from sharing in that success. So I think that should be a crime to, you know. Well, yeah. I mean, I have the movies. I have the movies that I'm trying to make right now, and you know, it's challenging to speak about those. Like, I'd love to tell about those, but I also believe. Like I've always found it crazy that we publicize our development. Like, oh, I'm developing a movie about this, because development is a hard process. And it's not usually successful, frankly. And so to publicize it means I'm publicizing my own failure. And okay. I'm okay with that if we all accept, like, that's what we mostly do is fail. I'm constantly working to fail better, you know, along the way. But
just to say,
thank you. But
but just to say, so if you, I understand.
But I have one that I don't really have that I was thinking about the other day. I had a new solution, so maybe someone can figure this out for me. I've always wanted to do a movie about the early days of making movies, right? And I thought about it first as old Hollywood, and I liked thinking about it as a comedy studio, because that's what they were in the very beginning. And that was somehow like too outrageous, like the one that didn't win. Like I like stories like Amadeus about Solari, you know, and not succeeding. The other day we sat down, Vanessa, and the night of Vanessa's premiere, we had while the movie was screening in New York, we went to a small Middle Eastern restaurant. Between the start and when we had to do the Q&A. And sitting across the way from us was F. Murray Abraham, who played Solari in it. And it's one of Vanessa's favorite movies. So I was like, oh my God, F. Murray Abraham. Vanessa's movie just opened. And did you know that? But so the story would be kind of that. But then I recently came across a collection of music called Excavated Shellac, which is a 60s song collection of the early recordings when they were trying to sell record players before they started really selling albums. And they went all around the world and recorded local artists on the heavy shellac. And only recently did somebody go out and find many of these and remaster them. And so you hear this sound when you listen. So this is like from 1915 to about 1925. So most people haven't heard recordings yet, right? And so when they sing and they perform, it's not recording and for performance so much, right? It's for the joy, right? Like if you want to look at one of the moments of chaos we're in, right? The thing that's most human, singing and dancing, also eating and a few other things too. But those things, many people now, because of social media, and they feel they can't ever sing or dance unless they can do it looking like they're professional. But the history of humankind is people getting up and singing and dancing and looking foolish. But now we're limiting doing that, right? So that's one of the things I think so interesting, hearing this music from 1915 and 1925. So I was thinking, like, because you also can't really afford to make bold cinema in America anymore because of the nature of the ecosystem, and so a lot of people think we should go overseas and start to try to find more collaboration overseas. Yes, hello. So I was thinking, what if the early studio, what could have been the dominant cinema culture comedy studio in the age of the silence was a global enterprise, right? And people were recording. The language of cinema hadn't yet been invented, right? So, we fell into patterns very quickly, right, of how we understand drama and the codes of what will happen next. But now I actually think we can think outside the box much more nimbly, and so you could think through different cultural methods of humor and joy, the presentation of humor and joy. So that's the movie, right? It's about the who was competing with the Hollywood studios, but all across the globe, and how they came together to defeat Hollywood, but they didn't win. It's the story of an underdog. So that's a movie that I was thinking this week that I would like to make.
Nice.
And probably will never get the chance.
You should make
Thank
it
you.
about.
I've never been asked that question before.
You should make it about the Italian film producers of the silent era that created the big colossals
Yeah.
and tried to sell them in Hollywood, but then, of course, Hollywood won.
I'm not going to be able to answer that question. I'm going to tell you why. Because someone asked me this on my newsletter, and I was like, that's a great question. I have to answer it. So Vanessa was going on tour with the movie, and I was like, okay, well, she goes away. I'm going to spend my focus answering that question. It took me 11 posts, right? I generally write about 2,000 words. So it took me 22,000 words to answer that question. And I had to, and you'll see how I think, because I have it all stacked. It'll be published on the newsletter in full. Because I felt like first I had to think through what the differences of then was to now. So the different effects, right? And then I had to think through the technological changes that occurred. And then and this was where it got really hard for me. I went down a dark hole. I had to examine the world as it is now and try to define it. And that got me very depressed at first. But I do this as an annual practice, and I think it's really important for people to do this, but you have to prepare yourself before you do it so you don't end up like a big puddle on the floor. And I find when I do that, when I take that proper precaution, yes, it takes me a week, and yes, I fall into a dark hole for a little bit, but I come out of it feeling much more inspired and willing to fight the good fight. So at that point, I start to be able to address what I would do if I was telling my younger self what I would do. And I think it is very much the lean into being human first and foremost. What are the qualities of being alive, right? What makes us distinct, and how does that affect me as an individual in terms of my own joy and pleasure? I would, combined with that, right, I would try to find some couple of lanes, so to speak, that I could have depth of understanding in, right? And I felt that when I was young, too. So for me, I was a good film scholar. I studied film. I still see at least 250 movies a year. And I think deeply about them. So I love the invite to be on a jury and to think about those movies. But I think it's also important to do that in other cultural forms, finding things in literature. So in the beginning for me, that was like, I loved hard-boiled 1950s fiction and 1960s drug-fueled sci-fi. Like those two things with things that I liked a lot. And knew, and it gave me ability to converse with other filmmakers who love those and understand those. But I also think you want to try to find, bold expressions of form. So when I entered film school in the 80s, what I wanted to do was the equivalent of French New Wave, for American punk rock attitude, for underexplored voices that had unique perspectives. I grew up in a working class environment and got sent to a elitist private school. So it was kind of mind-blowing, that change for me. And you learn, they use this mostly in terms of race, but for me, like code switching, learning how to talk to my friends at home and talk to my friends from school was a very big thing, and you see that difference. And so I liked how that got captured in the world. And that same thing now, like how do you do something unique and distinct that is going to quickly be separate from whatever the status quo is? I would be trying to find those voices. I think there's a lot, like you see this in America. America is very limited in its aesthetic embrace and approach, right? Yet when people start to look at filmmakers from a global perspective that have been embraced across the globe, like Yorgos Lanthimos, he's not timid at all in his aesthetic approach, right? And I believe, one of the nice things of those last 40 or 50 years is media literacy has just risen. Like people understand, and they are bored by the gun in the drawer in the first act that will go off in the third. That's not exciting anymore because, we've been so programmed by Chekhovian, setup that we want something new and different, right? How do you start to do that? And I would push that much harder than I did before. I've always liked low budget stuff because of the freedom of form it gives people when it's not there. And I think that probably what I would try to do if I was starting out now, and it's actually kind of interesting because I've mentored 2 movies like this just recently, I would try to do micro-budget films on a global scale. Movies that encompass the world, that show a diversity of perspective within that, but is aimed for an international audience, but is made with a small footprint, really tight, small crews. Like, watching documentaries, I love those moments where you feel that honest shift in somebody, where you see something happen to them in their face and you kind of feel like it's not directed, the camera's capturing it, it's really real. How can we bring that feeling, to more of our movies so that they feel like raw emotional truth? And that, I think that's what I would want the signature of my films to be, that kind of raw emotional truth.
Ted, when did you start making lists?
When did I start? So Massimo knows something about me. I have many lists on my phone. I'll tell you just how many it is.
Ted is
right
famous for.
I have 1,319 lists on my iPhone right now.
Yeah, because you just mentioned to answer the question that you analyze the world. You take a good look around, not just at the film industry, but in general, at the general taste. What songs, what books, what TV programs, the politics, and all.
Well, I really miss when we made mixtapes. So, both when Vanessa and I started dating, I'd give her mixed CDs that I would make for her. But I think the key hinge moment was we met. It's a great story, but I'm not going to tell you it now. Yeah. And I asked her to come with me to the Sundance Film Festival, where I was on the jury. And she turned me down because we really hadn't gone out much at all, if at all, yet. And I called her every night. And I would talk to her about the movies that I had seen, and about they had a big jury, like 5 or 6 people on the jury. And even though everybody was super smart, like great directors, great cinematographers, great actors, we didn't have a kind of common view of what lifted the good into the great. And I thought, that's really super interesting. I don't actually think that I've actually analyzed that myself. How do you transform mediocrity into magnificence. So this became the conversation that we would have when I would call her from, in the evening when I went back to the hotel. And it continued for the next 3 years, right? And at the end of 3 years, I had boiled it down to, for me, 32 things. And this was just a coincidence, but for those that that's the Bach variation and Mozart had 32 things that separated the mediocre waltz to the magnificent piece that they could do. I'm a little competitive, so I did 5 more after that because, I couldn't let,
You had to do 37.
But what I found when I had that list was it really elevated my creative practice. Because it almost became like a mantra, right? That it would be when I looked at a script and I saw that thing that didn't quite work, but I didn't know why it wasn't working, I would start to go through that list in my head. Or when I was on set and it wasn't going well and I was trying to figure out, why is this not going well? I'd go through that list in my head. Or I would do it in post-production, or when I saw a movie in screening. It really helped me. And it's part of, one of the things I think we all can do, but we have to, I've recently decided I have to change this language, right? Because it's in Amazon speak, it's called pattern recognition. How do we develop pattern recognition? What are the tools we can use to make decisions faster, right? But it's also part of machine learning. And I don't want us to lean towards that at all. So I want to change the way I refer to it. But I find it super helpful to work through things before you need to know them, right? It's just preparation. So disasters, what are you going to do when there's a disaster? Park your car nose out. If you still have a gasoline-powered car, don't let it get below a quarter tank, right? What are you going to do if there's a disaster, right? Do you go into the theater and look for the exit doors? You should, right? It's a little bit the same. Build a list about the things you love, right? I do this once a year. I try to write a list in 3 sittings, no more than 3 sittings, of 100 things that I love, right? And when I'm done with that, I go back and I try to add a sentence about why, right? And I find by having that, it helps me see other people, the things that I care about, faster. I recognize it. This is what I love. And sometimes, I think cinema, great cinema, has secret languages inside it. I got to talk to Olivier Assayas, thanks to this festival, about this. And this was something he felt too. Those things that aren't always spelled out. Like in Hollywood, they tell us to focus on an A theme and a B theme. Maybe there's another sub-theme, right? I find that when I work through the scripts with my directors, I have 25 different themes. And I think they're all there that aren't fully articulated, but they're sitting there in different ways, visually manifest through the sound, to whatever they are, but they're telling you that you relate. They're speaking a secret language to you, right? And I think that we, as humans, want to develop our ability to translate those secret languages better, right? And the more sensitive we get to those, the more we relate to other people, more we can feel the joy that art brings, right? And hear those things. And one of the ways that you do that is through lists. Right? You specify and you think deeply about the things that you love, the things that attract you, the things that influence you. After building that first list, because I was trying to impress the woman I would later marry, I decided maybe I could do this even more and get my whole practice a lot better.
Yeah. So it's good to have a, yes.
The things that won't exist in the future, I think will be much more limited than the things that will, because I think we all encompass multitudes, right? And there's room for so much. And so, much in the same way that we've seen, vinyl records become such a big thing again. I think we'll see things, have those waves that come and go. So there'll be some things that are temporarily gone and then will come back. And I do think that what feels to me like the corporate filmmaking of the 80s that I feel so much will go away and then it will come back, right? Because business dreams of predictable outcomes, guaranteed outcomes, right? Which is, to me, antithetical to human existence, right? And should be, So we'll keep trying to develop processes and things that deliver intended results, right? And there'll be a resistance from our spirit and as customers and audiences alike to that stuff. So that will disappear and then come back again because business dreams of that, right? And it's really easy to fall into that place. Like I owe a lot of my professional career to being a good picker. I generally can say I can predict things within a 85-90% outcome of my movies in terms of audiences. But and I'm generally pretty right historically, and that's foolish in its same sort of way. But that right there, I think speaks of something that will disappear and currently is here, right? And that is like right now in the business, we have a differential that I see between perceived market value and actual value, right? So that feels really terrible for the business, but it's a tremendous opportunity, right? So when I kind of launched the business part of my film career, right, the same conditions were there. We saw in the early 90s that there was a hunger and a demand that was very specified for a certain type of personal filmmaking that had a broad audience, right? But it was undervalued by the marketplace, right? So you could take a film out and people wouldn't pay what it was worth. But if you could find a few honest folks who would pay you in profit, you could develop a good business. But to make it work so that you could actually get the right market, the right value for your film, you had to do that equation, which I didn't know yet, that I mentioned of how audiences are built. By a regular cadence, and that word is key, a regular cadence at a consistent quality of product. So we recognized, me and several of my contemporaries and partners, that we had to figure out how to supply on a more regular basis, right? And if we could supply, we could drive the market value up through competition, through buyers. And I think that same opportunity exists right now, that when I look at most films, when I take a film into market, what comes back to me right now is something that is between like 40 and 60% of what I actually believe the actual value is, right? And there's many ways to calculate that. And that comes from both my time in foreign sales and my time on a global streamer, right? And those two different ways that we would value things. And I think that, that's a huge problem, particularly if you're not sharing in success, right? Which the global streaming platforms don't really allow for, to sell short at 40 to 60%, right? But I think that if there is a unified effort to build a non-dependent cinema ecosystem, and you're willing to make some sacrifices, so you have to take a long-term view and recognize that this enterprise is the 3 to 5 year endeavor. If you can do that, you can right that ship and start to move things back. So I think that the differential, the unfair valuing of film titles will disappear, but it's a lengthy endeavor. You want me to go on? I can keep you here all night. I could do, in the States, they call this in Congress a filibuster. I'm doing a 6-hour class in Madrid. You're all welcome to come. And I will just do it spontaneously. And I know how it's going to go, but you will see me not working off of a script. 6 hours, nonstop, and I guarantee you 25 things on your list that will change how you make movies.
Wow.
I'm not working with AI, although I'm encouraging folks, and I have a producer accelerator, the young producers in that 100% to go ahead and really try to learn how to use it. In the early days when I was coming up, I had the first laptop that I knew, right, anyone to have. I built a budget program because budgets weren't yet made on software. And it was huge advantage to me to get going, to actually know how to do that. I'm in a producer group of the kind of top Hollywood producers who supply literally over 90% of the Hollywood movies. And they're all like totally gung-ho because they feel the studios won't really be able to truly harness and use AI because of the nature of union agreements. And there's so much machine efficiency that one can bring to the process to be able to cover more things quicker and faster and solve a lot of the problems. I think it's where machines are already used, I think it can be super helpful in that process, and anyone that has an advantage in it will only have a greater advantage as time goes on. However, I'm of a certain age. I frankly believe there should be term limits on virtually everything, that the best leaders make themselves obsolete, usually by good design, not neglect. And I want to focus very much deep in my own practice on what I feel the human side of it all is, right? You know, I maybe have 20 more good years of making movies. Maybe it's 10, maybe it's 5, you know, we'll see. And I don't think I need to do too much. I'm not going to be able to help on that way as much as other people. But I think, you know, it can be really useful. I also just think it's really scary because right now in a culture that likes sameness, that likes conformity, that likes variations on a theme, you know, that isn't so much about boldness and novelty and authorship. I think our dependence based around convenience and cost, which is what the promise is not healthy for a art form, right? So I think most smart people will zig in that way, and my method will be to zag in the opposite way. At least for today. That's a really hard question.
Don't make a 25 titles list.
Yeah, that's a really hard question to answer because, you know, the films that have been made to me are locked. You know, they're rigid in that way. You know, I was profoundly inspired coming up by Kubrick and Scorsese. And, you know, very much liked that kind of maximal cinema where all of the disciplines in it were working together in unison, that you could feel that consideration. But it led me, in my own search for what I could contribute, to go to something much different, right? A looseness that I like. I really look first and foremost to where I can contribute and am needed most by those filmmakers. I would, you know, in a lot of ways, you know, what was most fortunate for me was I arrived in New York City the year that Stranger Than Paradise, She's Gotta Have It, Smithereens, and Blood Simple all came out, right? Smithereens was a little bit right before that. But it was 4 really unique filmmakers, all with unique voices, but somehow I could feel they were doing somewhat of the same thing. And that inspired me a great deal. I didn't want to work with them, though, because they had already accomplished that. I wanted to find the next thing. So I think that for me, that will always be the case. I'd like to find the folks that haven't really yet been given the chance. They may have made movies because it's hard to know somebody and where you think you can help them if they haven't already done work of some sort. But what I have to contribute can help them most. Yeah, I know that doesn't fully answer your question, but I don't think it's a question that I can really answer.
Yeah.
I failed. I went down 2 rabbit holes probably around the 2008 to 2012 period of time. And one was a form of business and how it would influence film, and the other was more the creative. And the creative side was thinking about multi-platform storytelling. And I got very excited about thinking about how a story world could live in different ways, in different forms. And I developed one project that was fully built, for that. And it was a horror film at its core, but it also was a gaming platform and a social network, and had different ways that people would discover it and play with it. And it felt very satisfying. Like literally the director, I felt I had met the new George Lucas, right? And like he understood things in a different way that other people had. And when we pitched it, what I realized each time we pitched it, the executive was feeling, wait a second, now I may not just get fired because I picked the wrong movie, I may get fired because I picked the right movie and we did it the wrong way on the social gaming platform, and we did it the wrong way in the multiplayer universe. And they just saw each method was 8 ways of failure, right? One of the truths of the cinema business is what people are most concerned about is losing their job, which is, and not making a great movie, but when you're trying to understand why things aren't working in Hollywood, it's often because someone thinks they're going to lose their job. The second way that I was confident of, and I was mistaken at that time, was, often what's referred to as DIY, do-it-yourself, distribution and marketing. The internet was really happening in a new way, and you could see where it was going. And a friend and I built a big business plan to do a global streaming studio, right? That was going to be focused on low budget, global cinema. And we took it around and didn't succeed in raising the money. But when I took another job and quit that job, one of the people I had pitched called me up and said, I really like that idea, and I'll put $10 million in. And I was like, wow, okay, great. And then he called me the next day, and he said, you said you wanted to build one of those SVOD platforms, one of those streaming VOD services? And I said, yeah. He said, well, I already built one. So why don't we use that as the vehicle? And I could pay you a salary. You don't have to do all this on spec. And we can build what you want on top of it. And I was like, that sounds great. And then I realized I was running a failed boutique streaming service, still too early for streaming to take hold. But I learned a lot doing it, and I did that for a year. And when the opportunity of Amazon came up, I was ready for it. That idea, though, now I think we have greater capacity for it than we ever did before. The idea of essentially a one-to-one relationship between the artist and their own audience. And how do you maintain that over an extended period of time? and then ultimately making it a rewarding, monetized experience. Not just to do business, but also not to devalue the art and the process. And I think that we start to see how creative people can communicate in multiple ways to people in a sustained fashion, right? So, you know, I maintain a newsletter and I'm just text-based, but that same platform or any of the other newsletter platforms now are media rich, and they're super well built for the person that has strong image making skills, has audio skills, has a unique voice, and whether that's, you know, writing about the business or writing about the dead bird that crashed against your window, you know, it all will work. And I think that that becomes really interesting and a necessary piece of the equation in this current cultural moment of total distraction, right? Like some people have written how the entertainment business is now built around distraction, right? That far more people look at Instagram reels than they watch movies, right? And all of that stuff, you see that tendency, how that is. How can you do that in an elevated method and make it part of your art and really kind of maybe something bigger like a Dogma 2025 phenomenon at the same time? And I think it's actually really doable. So I would call it like a non-platformed, what's it called when my mind's, I'm wearing out, I need that coffee, but a decentralized communication forms of narrative storytelling that allows you to go off in different strands without necessarily reaching a conclusion, without necessarily even being narrative, but somehow inform something bigger. And within that would be a feature film that is narratively driven, but it may also very much have all of the side elements. Like at Amazon, I was all excited, and we got a little bit of money, never got to do it. They had a technology on their platform called X-Ray, where if you stop a movie, you can see like who's in it and what the music is. But that's really just a time code-based footnote service, right? So you can make that footnote half a second long, and you're just so lucky to stop there, or it could be 3 minutes, and it could be the same thing, and it could serve you the information or port you to another place for further information. So you could build wormhole after wormhole after wormhole, and then come back to the movie 28 days later and continue on it. That gets me really excited. And I think that as we all get more and more media literate and start to be able to hold those things together and understand the pleasures of discovery, not just the structure of a plot along the way, that becomes something. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, dear Ted, we're done.